December 15, 2019. A classified Pentagon document marked "Eyes Only" was accidentally released through a Freedom of Information Act request. The 47-page file contained something that would make even the most hardened intelligence officers question reality itself. The document detailed encounters between U.S. military personnel and what can only be described as shape-shifting entities, creatures that the Navajo people have warned about for centuries. Today we're diving deep into the classified files that the Pentagon tried to bury. Files that reveal a terrifying connection between ancient Native American legends and modern military operations. This is Declassified Mysteries, and what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about what's really lurking in America's most secretive military installations. It all started when Dr. Sarah Chin, a paranormal researcher from UCLA, submitted what she thought was a routine FOIA request for documents related to unusual wildlife encounters on military bases. What she received 3 months later was far from routine. Among the heavily redacted pages was a file stamped with a classification level she'd never seen before: nightshade clearance required. But here's where it gets interesting. Someone at the Pentagon made a mistake. The file wasn't properly redacted. Dr. Chin found herself reading detailed accounts of military encounters with entities that defied all known laws of nature. Creatures that could mimic human voices perfectly. Animals that spoke in fluent English. Shapeshifters that seemed to possess an intelligence far beyond any known wildlife. The file was part of something called Project Wendigo, a classified Pentagon program that began in 1987 and officially ended in 2016. But according to these documents, it never really ended at all. Before we dive into the military encounters, we need to understand what we're dealing with. The Navajo people call them Yi Nald Lushii, which translates to "with it he goes on all fours." But most people know them by their English name, Skinwalkers. According to Navajo tradition, these are not just animals. They're medicine men and women who have turned to dark practices. They've consumed human flesh and performed forbidden rituals that allow them to transform into any animal they choose. But here's what most people don't know. Skinwalkers aren't just random shapeshifters. They're intelligent. They can mimic human speech. They can enter people's minds and manipulate their thoughts. And according to these Pentagon files, they're far more real than anyone in the government ever wanted to admit. The documents reveal that as early as 1943, military installations built on or near former Native American lands began reporting unusual incidents. But it wasn't until the 1980s that someone in the Pentagon decided these incidents deserved serious investigation. That someone was Dr. Marcus Reed, a former CIA operative who had worked on the infamous MKUltra mind control experiments. Dr. Marcus Reed's background was perfect for this kind of work. During the 1960s and 70s, he had been part of the CIA's most secretive programs, experiments in psychological manipulation, drug-induced mind control, and what the agency called paranormal warfare research. But by 1987, Reed had moved to the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency. That's when he proposed something unprecedented: a systematic study of supernatural encounters on U.S. military bases. His proposal was buried for months until an incident at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada changed everything. On March 3, 1987, 2 Air Force security police officers were conducting a routine perimeter patrol when they encountered something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. According to the classified incident report, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres and Airman First Class David Kim were driving along the base's northern fence line at approximately 2:30 a.m. when their radio crackled to life. The voice coming through was perfectly clear, speaking in standard American English. "Officers, please respond to grid reference 247 Alpha. We have a situation requiring immediate assistance." Torres responded, asking for clarification on the nature of the situation. The voice replied, "Multiple casualties. Require medical assistance immediately." But here's the problem: the voice was coming from the wrong direction. Their radio equipment showed the transmission was originating from outside the base, in the middle of the Nevada desert where no human settlements existed for 50 miles in any direction. Against protocol, Torres and Kim decided to investigate. What they found would become the foundation for Project Wendigo. According to the classified report, Torres and Kim followed the radio transmissions to a location approximately 2 miles outside the base perimeter. Using night vision equipment, they spotted what appeared to be a person lying motionless on the desert floor. As they approached, the figure suddenly stood up. But something was wrong. The person appeared to be an elderly Native American man wearing traditional buckskin clothing, but he was standing in an impossible position. His legs were bent backwards at the knees, like an animal's hind legs. The man spoke to them in perfect English. "Officers, thank you for responding. I've been waiting for you." Torres, a combat veteran, drew his sidearm and ordered the man to identify himself. The response chilled both officers to the bone. The man replied using Torres' exact voice, mimicking not just his words but his exact tone and inflection. "Officers, thank you for responding. I've been waiting for you." Then the impossible happened. According to both witnesses, the man dropped to all fours and began transforming. His limbs elongated, fur sprouted from his skin, and within seconds, a massive coyote stood where the man had been. But this coyote continued to speak in Torres' voice. "Don't be afraid, officers. We have much to discuss." Both men opened fire. The creature let out a sound that Torres later described as a mixture between a coyote's howl and human laughter. It then vanished into the darkness, moving faster than anything either officer had ever seen. When they returned to base and filed their report, it went straight to Dr. Marcus Reed's desk. Project Wendigo was approved within 48 hours. Reed's team began by collecting every unusual incident report from military bases across the American Southwest. What they found was disturbing. Over the previous 4 decades, there had been more than 200 reported encounters with entities that displayed shapeshifting abilities. The vast majority of these incidents occurred at installations built on former Native American territories. But Reed discovered something else, a pattern. Fort Carson, Colorado, built on former Cheyenne hunting grounds. 17 reported incidents between 1952 and 1987. Luke Air Force Base, Arizona, constructed on land sacred to the Tohono people. 23 reported encounters. Camp Pendleton, California, built on former Luiseno territory. 31 documented cases. But the highest concentration of incidents was at installations near Navajo lands. Bases like Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico, Hill Air Force Base in Utah, and several classified facilities in Arizona. Reed's theory was radical. These weren't random encounters with unknown animals. These were deliberate interactions with an intelligent species that had been living alongside humans for centuries. But his investigation took an even stranger turn when he began interviewing Native American veterans who had served at these bases. One interview stands out in the classified files. On November 12, 1988, Reed spoke with Staff Sergeant Joseph Yazzie, a Navajo Marine who had served at Camp Pendleton from 1983 to 1987. Yazzie had never filed an official report about his experiences, but when Reed approached him, he was surprisingly willing to talk. "My grandmother warned me about this before I enlisted," Yazzie told Reed. "She said the military was building their bases on cursed land, and that the old spirits wouldn't like it." Yazzie described multiple encounters during his time at Pendleton. Late-night patrols where he heard voices calling his name from the desert. Animals that watched him with human-like intelligence. And one incident that Reed classified as Priority Alpha. In March 1985, Yazzie was part of a training exercise in the remote areas of Camp Pendleton. His unit was conducting a nighttime navigation course when they became separated in dense brush. Yazzie heard his squad leader calling his name, directing him to a rally point. He followed the voice for nearly 30 minutes through increasingly difficult terrain. But when he finally reached the location, he found something impossible. His squad leader was there, exactly as expected. But he was also back at the original starting point, according to radio communications. Yazzie was speaking to someone or something that perfectly resembled his superior officer but couldn't possibly be him. "The thing that looked like Sergeant Martinez knew everything about me," Yazzie told Reed. "My hometown, my family, my fears. It spoke to me about things only Martinez would know. But its eyes, there was something ancient and hungry in those eyes." When the real Sergeant Martinez finally located Yazzie 2 hours later, he was found sitting alone in the desert, staring at nothing. Reed's investigation took a dark turn when he began connecting these encounters to his previous work with the CIA's mind control experiments. During the MKUltra program, researchers had explored every possible method of psychological manipulation, including the use of hallucinogenic drugs, sensory deprivation, and what they called reality distortion techniques. But what if they hadn't been the first to discover these methods? Reed's files contain a startling hypothesis: that skinwalkers represent an ancient form of psychological warfare that predates modern intelligence agencies by thousands of years. According to his research, these entities don't just shapeshift physically, they manipulate perception itself. They can make people see, hear, and believe things that aren't real. They can implant false memories and erase real ones. This theory gained credibility when Reed discovered that several military personnel who had reported Skinwalker encounters later experienced severe psychological problems. Memory gaps, hallucinations, and what military psychiatrists diagnosed as atypical PTSD. But Reed suspected something more sinister was happening. These weren't random psychological casualties of supernatural encounters. They were evidence of systematic mental manipulation by an intelligence far more sophisticated than anything in the government's arsenal. Reed's investigation reached its climax in 1991 when he received permission to conduct direct communication attempts with these entities. Operation Nightfall was the most classified mission in Project Wendigo's history. The details are heavily redacted in the leaked documents, but what we can piece together is terrifying. On October 31, 1991, Halloween night, whether by coincidence or design, Reed's team set up a communication station in the desert outside Nellis Air Force Base. Their goal was simple: establish contact with a Skinwalker and attempt meaningful dialogue. The team included Reed, 2 linguists specializing in Native American languages, a psychiatrist, and 6 heavily armed security personnel. They began by broadcasting traditional Navajo chants mixed with English requests for communication. For the first 3 hours, nothing happened. Then, at 11:47 p.m., their equipment detected an approaching presence. What happened next is described in Reed's own handwriting. Subject approached from the northwest, initially appearing as a large wolf. Approximately 30 feet from our position, subject assumed human form. Male, approximately 60 years old, traditional Navajo dress. Subject spoke first. The entity's opening statement, recorded on audio equipment, was chilling. "Dr. Reed, we have been waiting for you to contact us. We have much to discuss about your government's activities on our ancient lands." The conversation that followed lasted 4 hours and 23 minutes. The entire audio recording remains classified, but Reed's summary notes reveal disturbing details. The entity claimed to represent what it called the Old Intelligence, a collective consciousness that had existed in the American Southwest for thousands of years. It said that modern military installations were built on sites of spiritual significance, creating what it termed reality distortions. But the most shocking revelation was this: the entity claimed that the U.S. government had been in contact with its kind since 1943, and that there was an ongoing agreement between the two. According to the entity Reed spoke with, the first contact between the U.S. military and Skinwalkers occurred during World War II. The government needed secure communication methods that couldn't be intercepted by enemy forces. The Navajo Code Talkers were part of the official program, but there was an unofficial program as well, one that involved entities capable of supernatural surveillance and communication. The entity claimed that in exchange for allowing military installations on their sacred lands, certain factions of these ancient beings provided intelligence services to the U.S. government. They could shapeshift to conduct surveillance behind enemy lines. They could manipulate minds to extract information. They could even eliminate targets without leaving traditional evidence. But by 1991, the agreement was breaking down. The entity told Reed that younger, more aggressive members of their kind were tired of the arrangement. They wanted humans to evacuate the sacred sites entirely. The recent increase in military base encounters wasn't random wildlife behavior, it was a deliberate campaign of intimidation. Reed's notes become increasingly frantic as he documents this conversation. He writes, "If this entity is telling the truth, then the U.S. government has been in partnership with supernatural forces for nearly 50 years. The implications for national security, and for our understanding of reality itself, are staggering." But the conversation took an even darker turn when the entity began discussing specific military personnel. The entity presented Reed with names, ranks, and service numbers of military personnel who had reported Skinwalker encounters. But it wasn't just listing witnesses, it was evaluating them. According to Reed's notes, the entity had been studying these individuals, learning about human psychology and military procedures through direct observation and mental contact. Some personnel were classified as compatible, individuals who showed the psychological profile necessary for what the entity called deeper communication. Others were marked as resistant, people whose minds couldn't be easily manipulated. But most disturbing were those marked as compromised. These were military personnel who had experienced such intense Skinwalker encounters that their psychological stability was permanently damaged. The entity claimed responsibility for these cases, describing them as necessary adjustments to maintain operational security. Reed realized he wasn't just investigating supernatural encounters, He was documenting systematic psychological warfare being conducted against U.S. military personnel by an intelligence service that had operated in the shadows for centuries. His final question to the entity was simple: "What do you want?" The response, recorded word for word in Reed's notes, would define the remainder of Project Wendigo. "Dr. Reed, what we want is what we have always wanted: for your kind to respect the ancient boundaries. But if that is not possible, then we want your government to acknowledge our authority over these lands and compensate us accordingly. And if the government refuses? Then the encounters will escalate. What your personnel have experienced so far are merely warnings. We are capable of much more direct action." Reed's meeting with the entity marked a turning point in Project Wendigo. Over the following months, encounters at military bases became more frequent and more aggressive. The leaked files document dozens of incidents between 1992 and 1995 where military personnel reported encounters with shapeshifters who demonstrated increasing hostility. At Edwards Air Force Base in California, security guards reported being stalked by wolves that spoke in human voices, attempting to lure them away from their posts. At Fort Carson in Colorado, entire patrol units reported being surrounded by animals that moved in coordinated military formations, as if they understood tactical procedures. But the most disturbing incidents occurred at classified installations in Nevada and Utah. In March 1994, a security team at a facility whose name is completely redacted in the documents reported an attempted infiltration by entities that had assumed the exact appearance of high-ranking military officers. These shapeshifters possessed detailed knowledge of classified protocols and could perfectly mimic the mannerisms and speech patterns of the individuals they impersonated. Only advanced biometric security systems prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach of national security. Reed's reports from this period show growing concern that the entities were evolving their tactics, learning to exploit weaknesses in military security procedures. But in 1995, something happened that changed everything. This is where Reed's investigation took an unexpected turn into territory that even seasoned conspiracy researchers find difficult to accept. In July 1995, exactly 48 years after the famous Roswell incident, Reed received intelligence that would connect his Skinwalker research to the government's most guarded UFO secrets. A former Air Force intelligence officer approached Reed with classified documents suggesting that the 1947 Roswell crash wasn't the government's first encounter with non-human intelligence. According to these documents, military installations in the Southwest had been experiencing anomalous entity encounters since the early 1940s. But investigators had always assumed they were dealing with two separate phenomena: extraterrestrial visitors and Native American supernatural entities. Reed's contact presented a disturbing alternative theory. What if they were the same thing? The documents suggested that what people interpreted as skinwalkers might actually be a form of non-human intelligence that had been present on Earth for thousands of years, long before the modern UFO era began. This intelligence had learned to mimic not just human and animal forms, but human cultural concepts as well. To Native Americans, they appeared as spiritual entities fitting traditional beliefs. To modern military personnel, they might appear as extraterrestrial visitors. Reed's final reports explore this possibility with growing conviction. He writes, "The entities we've been studying may represent an intelligence so far beyond human understanding that we can only interpret their activities through the lens of our existing belief systems. To the Navajo, they are shape-shifting witches. To UFO researchers, they are alien visitors. But what if they are something else entirely, something that predates both interpretations?" Project Wendigo was officially terminated in December 1995, just months after Reed's exploration of the UFO connection. The official reason given was budget constraints and lack of actionable intelligence. But the leaked documents tell a different story. Reed had begun pushing for direct military engagement with the entities. He wanted to test their capabilities through controlled confrontation scenarios. He believed that understanding their limitations was crucial for national security. But his superiors were horrified by the proposal. The last thing the Pentagon wanted was to escalate a conflict with an intelligence service that had demonstrated the ability to infiltrate secure facilities and manipulate human psychology. Reed's final report, dated December 15, 1995, contains a warning that would prove prophetic. Terminating this project without resolution will not make the problem disappear. These entities have demonstrated both the capability and the intention to continue their activities regardless of our level of official attention. By choosing to ignore this threat, we are guaranteeing that future encounters will be uncontrolled, unmonitored, and potentially catastrophic. 3 days after submitting this report, Dr. Marcus Reed was found dead in his Pentagon office, apparently from a heart attack. He was 52 years old with no history of cardiac problems. All Project Wendigo files were immediately classified at the highest levels and transferred to an unknown location. But Reed's death didn't end the government's involvement with Skinwalker encounters. The leaked documents reveal that after 1995, oversight of these incidents was transferred to a different agency entirely. Instead of the Defense Intelligence Agency, reports of supernatural encounters on military bases were now handled by something called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, the same Pentagon UFO program that was revealed to the public in 2017. This suggests that the government's approach shifted from treating skinwalkers as a separate phenomenon to incorporating them into the broader category of unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. But the encounters never stopped. The leaked files contain incident reports dating as recently as 2018, describing encounters that follow the same patterns Reed documented in the 1990s. Military personnel continue to report shape-shifting entities, voice mimicry, and psychological manipulation attempts at installations throughout the American Southwest. The difference is that these reports are now buried in the same classification system that hides the government's UFO investigations. Which raises a troubling question. If the Pentagon is still encountering these entities and still classifying the reports at the highest levels, what exactly are they hiding? The most recent documents in the leaked files date from 2018 and 2019, suggesting that whatever Dr. Reed investigated in the 1990s is still active today. A particularly detailed report comes from an unnamed Marine Corps installation in California, where security personnel reported a series of incidents that would have fit perfectly into Reed's original research. In November 2018, a security team was conducting perimeter patrol when they encountered what appeared to be a coyote exhibiting unusual behavior. Instead of fleeing when approached, the animal maintained eye contact and appeared to be studying the Marines' equipment and procedures. When one of the Marines attempted to scare the animal away by shouting, the coyote responded in clear English, "You shouldn't be here. This land remembers what came before." The animal then stood on its hind legs, maintaining perfect balance, and walked backwards into the darkness while continuing to stare at the Marines. Similar incidents were reported at the same installation throughout late 2018 and early 2019, always involving animals that demonstrated human-level intelligence and the ability to speak. But these modern reports contain details that weren't present in the earlier files. The entities now demonstrate knowledge of contemporary technology, military procedures, and even current events. In one incident, a shapeshifter engaging security personnel mentioned specific details about recent deployment schedules that should have been classified information. This suggests that whatever intelligence Reed was dealing with has continued to evolve and adapt over the past 25 years. So what are we to make of these leaked Pentagon files? Are we looking at evidence of an ancient intelligence that has been sharing North American territory with humans for thousands of years? Are these extraterrestrial visitors using shape-shifting technology beyond our understanding? Or is this an elaborate psychological warfare program designed to test military personnel under extreme stress? The truth is, we may never know for certain. But what we can say is this: the US government has been taking these encounters seriously for at least 75 years. Serious enough to classify the reports at the highest levels. Serious enough to spend decades and millions of dollars investigating them. And serious enough to continue covering them up today. Dr. Reed's final warning from 1995 seems more relevant than ever. By choosing to ignore this threat, we are guaranteeing that future encounters will be uncontrolled, unmonitored, and potentially catastrophic. The leaked Pentagon files suggest that these encounters are not only continuing but escalating. The entities involved appear to be growing bolder, more direct in their interactions with military personnel. And if the government's own documents are accurate, these entities possess capabilities that represent a fundamental challenge to our understanding of reality itself. The question isn't whether something strange is happening at America's military installations. The question is whether we're prepared for whatever comes next. Because according to these files, the entities the Navajo have warned about for centuries aren't going anywhere. They're still here. They're still watching. And they're still waiting. What they're waiting for, only time will tell. That if you found this investigation compelling, there are dozens of other declassified mysteries waiting to be explored. From CIA mind control experiments to military UFO encounters, the truth is often stranger than fiction. But remember, question everything, trust no one completely, and always look deeper than the official story. Because in the world of classified government operations, what they tell you is never the whole truth.